Do you know what the definition of free speech is? Well, freedom of speech is a principle that supports the freedom of an individual or a community to articulate their opinions and ideas without fear of retaliation, censorship, or legal sanction. Now, you might be saying, what are the limits of free speech? Well, off of the Britannica, few narrow categories of speech that are not protected from the government restrictions are things inciting violence, defamation, fraud, obscenity, child pornography, fighting words, and threats, none of which I cover on this channel, yet I have fallen victim to none other than big tech censorship. Thanks to Rob for letting me know that my channel no longer shows up on searches. I need to do some testing for myself, but I'm going to be talking about in my monologue, and then we are going to get into Russia, Ukraine. Do not worry, but this is very important. So good evening, welcome to The Real Report, happy Tuesday. Now I strive to depict the world as it is, to live in reality. Censorship is set into place by the government, but it is run by people themselves, those with no power desperately clinging on to the only thing they have control over. But muzzling me and the millions like me simply shows they fear what we have to say, that we might speak the truth. They're afraid that people will become smarter than them, but they are cowards. Also, the only dignity free people have is to speak out. After free speech is entirely gone, just know that the ultimate form of censorship becomes assassination. It is only going to get worse from here in the coming months and years. You've probably seen the leaked documents about the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS's plans to police disinformation. This is a topic that I can't not cover, so check the timestamp down below if you want to hop right into the Russia-Ukraine report for when it starts. Now, the Department of Homeland Security is quietly broadening its efforts to curb speech it considers dangerous. Illustrating an expansive effort by the agency to influence tech platforms, the DHS announced a new disinformation governance board, which obviously got pushback, and since the war on terror has been wound down, they're looking for something else to do, like policing the internet. Records appended to a lawsuit filed by the Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, a Republican who is also running for Senate, discusses some of the key takeaways, warning that the threat of subversive information on social media could undermine support for the U.S. government. Well, you know what undermines support for the U.S. government? When you silence people who are simply reporting objective current events, truths, things happening. JP Morgan and Chase, Twitter, we're all in on it. We need a media infrastructure that is held accountable. Accountable by who is the big question. According to a draft copy of DHS's review, DHS's capstone report outlined the department plans to target, quote, inaccurate information on a wide range of topics, including the origins of the 2019 pandemic and the efficacy of those jabs, racial justice, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's probably the most bizarre thing to put on here, as if Benghazi wasn't botched enough. I suppose that's why they don't want us talking about Afghanistan as well, and the nature of U.S. support to Ukraine. So naturally, my Russia-Ukraine videos falls under some sort of misinformation, naturally. Now, disinformation originating domestically by claiming that terrorist threats can be exacerbated by misinformation and disinformation spread online. So apparently, me simply reviewing news articles falls under something along the lines of supporting domestic terrorism. Absolutely disgusting. So, I just wanted to touch base on that. And now we're going to get into the Russia-Ukraine thing. If you guys despise censorship as much as me, and also too, here, you can read it on Yahoo News. This is all public information. Posted October 31st on Yahoo, 6:51 p.m. Leaked documents reveal DHS collaborated with Facebook to target disinformation, and it doesn't stop at Facebook. So again, if you guys think that censorship is disgusting, smack the like button, subscribe, share with friends and family. Also too, you can see in the bottom right of the corner, we've got a donation box now. So thanks to Rob for getting us to 15% of our goal to try and keep the channel going. So Bunch of claps. Thank you, Rob. It is greatly appreciated. And now let's get into the Russia-Ukraine news. Ukraine unleashes mass kamikaze drone boat attack on Russia's Black Sea Fleet headquarters. Russia says Ukrainian aerial drones and unmanned surface vessels targeted the home of its Black Sea Fleet, damaging at least a minesweeper. Largest city in Crimea and the home of Russia's Black Sea Fleet woke up to heavy explosions and anti-aircraft fire during an attack Russian officials say included aerial drones and especially unmanned surface vessels, both of which were suicide or kamikaze types. Attack run on a guided missile frigate and Russian forces engaging the USVs with machine gun fire. You can see some of the videos. I'll fast forward here. There's a better one farther down. The USVs appear to be of the same design as the mystery drone boat found near Sevastopol in September, which I did a video on that as well. Now, Russian officials claim that only one vessel was slightly damaged, while all Ukrainian aerial drones were destroyed, and that, here's where things get interesting, quote, British specialists were involved. Now, the Black Sea Fleet's new flagship after the Project 1164 Slava-class cruiser Moskva sank in April was damaged in the attack at this time. So keep an eye out for more developments with this. Video from Sevastopol showed several explosions both in the water and near the port itself. There's the explosion. Here's another video.
Что-то взорвалось. Что-то ебануло.
There it is exploding. And Russia accuses UK of involvement in naval drone strike in Crimea, alleged the specialists from the UK helped them with training and supervision for the failed attack by Ukraine. Again, Russia accuses the British Navy of Nord Stream, also a terrorist attack. This came out in the last 48 hours. Russia's defense ministry on Saturday issued a statement charging that the British Navy blew up the Nord Stream gas pipeline last month in what marks the first formal and direct accusation leveled against the UK, which is an interesting turn of events as everybody and their mothers suspected the United States. However, Russia has now come out and said, after weeks of claiming they knew who did it, that it was the United Kingdom. So keep an eye as events develop there. According to available information, representatives of the unit of the British Navy took part in the planning, provision, and implementation of a terrorist attack in the Baltic Sea on September 26 this year, blowing up the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines without specifying any evidence, though. So again, without specifying any evidence, NATO conducted a military exercise during the summer close to the location where the undersea explosions occurred. However, those who profit from it have done it, Putin says. This past week, UK Defense Ministry slammed the new allegation as false claims of an epic scale. Russia says Crimea attack drones used grain corridor safe zone. As Russia said Sunday, it recovered debris from drones that attacked its fleet in Sevastopol, exploiting the safe zone of the grain corridor, and could have been launched even from a civilian ship. The marine drones were moving in the safe zone of the grain corridor. Russia also said some of the drones used in what it called a terrorist attack had, big takeaway here, Canadian-made parts. Now, the Army said its specialists had conducted an examination of Canadian-made navigation modules. Kiev and the West condemned Moscow's decision to exit the grain deal, which had agreed to ease a global food crisis. And that only is going to get worse, and we're going to talk about food not only in the next video, but later in this one as well. Now, Russia suspends participation in the Ukraine grain deal after massive drone attack on the Black Sea Fleet. Russia again suspended its participation in the Ukraine grain export deal after a swarm of drones targeted at least one Russian warship from the Black Sea Navy. Moscow immediately suspended its compliance with the deal known as the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and the United Nations and Turkey brokered that deal, allowing safe passage for cargo ships in and out of Ukraine's ports to haul farm goods worldwide. The deal is set to expire on November 19th. Now, the attack destroyed 4 Marine unmanned vehicles. The Russians destroyed those, and 3 more devices were destroyed on the internal roadstead. Again, on Zero Hedge, they've got all of the clips linking back to Twitter. And New York Times reported the UN has been in contact with Russian officials regarding the comments from the Russian Defense Ministry about suspending its deal, saying it is vital that all parties refrain from any action that would imperil the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which is critical and will impact access to food for millions of people. So, in case you were still worried or had forgotten about food in the oncoming famine, there's your reminder, not only from Russia, but also the United Nations. And extending the grain deal, however, Moscow demands over its own ag exports were met, and the reversal of the agreement could result in a sharp spike in grain prices, and they have. Now, Moscow uses a false pretext to block the grain corridor, which ensures food security for millions of people, the Ukraine's foreign ministry says. And Russia says it recovers drones used in the Black Sea Fleet attack in Crimea, so just another article backing that up. Drones with Canadian-made parts used in Black Sea Fleet attack in Crimea, Russia, from News 18. And wheat prices jump after Russia exits the grain deal. UN races to save the agreement, which isn't going to happen. Wheat in Chicago jumped nearly 8% to $8.9 a bushel Monday morning. And this may deepen the global food crisis and push tens of millions of people closer to starvation. All this comes as countries from Europe to the Middle East are short of food, fuel, and fertilizer. Russian missiles knock out most of Kiev's water supply as fears facing a bleak winter. A wave of Russian missile strikes hit critical infrastructure across Ukraine on Monday, leaving most of the capital without water and power. 350,000 homes in Kiev lost power in 80% of the city. 40% of residents still do not have water. Ukraine's army said more than 50 cruise missiles were fired by aircraft from within Russia on Monday. And here's where things get a little wacky. They said 44 of which were intercepted, but they've also said Russian missiles and drones hit 10 regions, damaging 18 infrastructure sites, most of them energy related. So they clearly did not intercept 44, or Russia launched more, either or. And 80% of Kiev without water after Russian strikes, mayor says. That's again from The Hill, just to back up that previous article. U.S. LNG cannot replace the Russian natural gas that Europe has lost as people finally come to terms with the truth. Europe has relied on U.S. LNG imports to offset the loss of Russian gas, with nearly 70% of U.S. LNG exports heading to Europe in September. In the long term, Europe will have to find other sources of natural gas as its inventories are likely to drain over the upcoming winter. Ultimately, Europe will have to reduce demand for natural gas going forward as there is very little available supply left. Ahead of the 2023-2024 winter, again, they're already talking about 2024 on oilprice.com, the gap in gas supply in Europe will be much wider without Russian gas. The good news is that Russia looks close to having played its last card, which I highlighted that because it's an absolutely ludicrous line. That is not their last hand, and it's baffling that media sources all over the world try and play into the propaganda that the Russians are close to losing, they don't have anything left, they don't have any food, blah, 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 blah. It's just not the case. And I'm not on their side either, for the record. Russia says U.S. lowering nuclear threshold with newer bombs in Europe. I covered this in my previous video about the new B-61-12 nuclear weapons. Russia said on Saturday that the accelerated deployment of modernized US B-61 tactical nuclear weapons at NATO bases in Europe would lower the nuclear threshold and that Russia would take the move into account in its military planning. Russia has about 2,000 working tactical nuclear weapons, while the United States has around 200 such weapons, half of which are at bases in Italy, Germany, Turkey, Belgium, and the Netherlands. I assume that's the B-61-12 variants, those 200. The United States told a closed NATO meeting this month that it would accelerate the deployment of the modernized version several months earlier than planned. The 12-foot B-61-12 gravity bomb carries a lower yield nuclear warhead that many earlier versions is more accurate and can penetrate below ground. They turn these weapons into battlefield weapons, thereby reducing the nuclear threshold. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has triggered the gravest confrontation between Moscow and the West since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, when the two Cold War superpowers came closest to nuclear war. President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly said Russia will defend its territory with with all available means, including nuclear weapons if attacked. And France to supply Ukraine with air defense systems and expand training for Ukrainian soldiers. France has announced it will provide air defense systems to Ukraine and expand a training program for Ukrainian soldiers. This will be very interesting to see what this obviously came out on October 16th, but I had missed this article previously. It'll be interesting when troops hit the ground in France to train if there's any retaliation by Russia. Again, France has announced it will provide air defense systems to Ukraine and expand a training program for Ukrainian soldiers. Up to 2,000 soldiers will be embedded with military units in France, rotating through for several weeks of combat training. More specialized training in logistics and other needs, and how to operate the French artillery. We are noting the fact that the war, alas, will last. So they're finally reinforcing that idea that this war is not going to be over anytime soon, most likely. A new generation of soldiers must also be trained to last the distance. Down to the last Ukrainian, eh? The minister said the Krotail air defense missile batteries that France is preparing to send to Ukraine will be particularly useful in the fight against drones and against aerial bombardments. France has 12 of the batteries. It will be a significant number that they're going to send to enable them to defend their skies. France has supplied 18 Caesar artillery pieces and is in discussions to provide 6 more, and they've also set up a fund of 100 million euros, which the Ukrainians can use to buy what they want on condition that the supplier is French. Norway raises military alert in response to the Ukraine war. Norway is now Europe's largest gas supplier as well, and they share a border with Russia in the Arctic. Norway will put its military on a raised level of alert from Tuesday, and Norway will seek to bring its new fleet of U.S.-made P-8 Poseidon submarine hunting maritime patrol aircraft into regular operation at a faster pace than originally planned, which I've also covered previously. The raised level is expected to last a year, possibly more, Swedish and Danish waters, and has received support from British, Dutch, French, and German armed forces, so just interesting to see who all's in that region. The Nordic nation of 5.4 million people is now also the biggest exporter of natural gas to the European Union. U.S. President reportedly loses temper with Ukrainian counterpart Zelensky when latter immediately asks for more aid after being told of the aid package in progress. This one, you ever read the old kid's tale, when you give a mouse a cookie? Well, that's kind of what this is turning into. U.S. President Joe Biden yelled at Zelensky during a recent phone call. Biden had spoken with Zelensky to tell him that he had authorized another $1 billion in aid for Ukraine. Zelensky immediately asked for more, has repeatedly expressed dissatisfaction with Israel as well, which has provided a significant amount of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, but no military equipment. And now Zelensky's lashing out, saying Israel's refusal to provide military aid to Ukraine in response to Russia's invasion caused the current military alliance between Russia and Iran, which is just absurd. Joe Biden working on another $50 billion in aid to send Ukraine after the midterm elections. So while places like Flint, Michigan still don't have clean water, healthcare is inaccessible to a lot, and public, well, really everything, infrastructure from roads, bridges, and trains, and all that good stuff, factories, are all deteriorating. We continue to send billions and billions and billions of dollars a month to Ukraine. The number is expected to be around $50 billion after the midterms, and Biden lost his temper in June during the call with the Ukrainian president as he kept asking for more money. But don't worry, because we're going to send another $50 billion. Incalculable. And you wonder why we have hyperinflation, especially in the energy and food sector. It's a lot bigger than Ukraine, it's Eastern Europe, it's NATO, it's real serious consequential outcomes. They have no sense of American foreign policy. These guys don't get it, Biden said at a fundraiser in Pennsylvania. I wonder if it was good old Scranton. Tens of thousands of Czechs revolt against sanctions on Russia and the war in Ukraine as people around the world have had enough. It looks like defeat Putin at all costs is not enough to convince them to starve and freeze to death this winter. Here's a 10-second clip. So you can see here when it zooms out, there's definitely thousands to say the least. And let's get out of NATO. Discontent soars across Europe as Russian sanctions backfire. Western sanctions against Russia have been considered a powerful foreign policy tool by the US and the EU to paralyze Moscow back to the Stone Age. Those sanctions against Moscow have entirely backfired, sparking the worst cost of living crisis for Europeans in a generation. Protesting soaring electricity bills, the worst inflation in decades, and tens of thousands of people have marched across metro areas in France, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Germany, and many more countries, fed up with sanctions on Russia that have sparked economic ruin, and support for NATO's involvement in Ukraine is starting to wane amongst the common folk. There has been an increasing awareness and dissent among Europeans about their country's leaders prioritizing NATO's ambitions in Ukraine over their own citizens. I wonder why. Again, leading to energy hyperinflation and supplying weapons to Ukraine, which has made Moscow displeased. Some Europeans are now demanding NATO negotiate with Moscow to end the war so that economic turmoil can abate. So it looks like Russia might have one more ace up their sleeve after all. This is merely the silence before the storm. The discontent is great, and people do not have any sense that the government has a plausible strategy to master the crisis. That's probably the biggest takeaway from this article, as the Wall Street Journal pointed that out. Bottom line is, nobody cares about Ukraine if their own kids don't have dinner and you're freezing to death in your home. You can't help others unless you've already helped yourself, and that's just how it is. The worst is yet to come. Civil unrest set to surge worldwide as socioeconomic pressure builds. Soaring food, energy, and shelter inflation have already led to pockets of unrest or collapse in Sri Lanka, Peru, Kenya, Ecuador, Iran, and Europe. And an interesting one, guess what? No other than the Rockefeller Foundation warns that a massive, immediate food crisis is nearing, and the United Nations again said this summer that the world is marching towards starvation and food insecurity, which is going to kill millions of Africans and probably more Europeans at this point, with an increased likelihood of civil unrest and political violence. Only a significant reduction in global food and energy prices can arrest the negative global trend in civil unrest risk. Recession fears are mounting, and inflation is expected to be worse in 2023 than in 2022. And if you guys haven't been paying attention, the Feds are likely going to raise rates again this week. The question remains if central banks can arrest inflation with the most aggressive interest rate hikes in decades. If not, then Verist expects the next 6 months are likely to be even more disruptive than earlier this year. Putin announces the end of mobilization in Russia as 300,000. That roster has been filled, and roughly 82,000 of them have entered the special military operation. Again, Russia's partial mobilization of troops is complete. 218,000 remain in training, and 82,000 have been deployed to the conflict zone. So again, if you guys found anything interesting, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and if you guys really appreciate my work, I would be very thankful for any donations to help out. If my tone was a little off in this video, it's simply due to the fact of being censored and repeatedly having my views capped at low numbers, but we will persevere. Have a good night.